Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today I'm bringing you into a conversation with Deb Schmill. Deb lost her daughter Becca to fentanyl. We're going to get to know Becca and her story today in an effort to educate parents and help all of us protect our children from these online harms. This episode is sponsored by Bark Technologies, a parental controls company for parents who are looking to protect their children from online harms like drug content. You'll learn today that pills sold on social media are extremely prevalent, especially on Snapchat. And I'm so grateful that the parents of today have resources like Bark to help protect our children online. Now let's get into my conversation with Deb. So Deb, can you just start by telling listeners about your daughter, Becca? So what were her interests? What was she like? We just love to get to know her.
Yeah, so first of all, I adored her. I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely adored her.
Mm-hmm.
I know people say they like their kids pretty much. I adored my daughter. She was just such a love. We snuggled all the time. She was so warm and snuggly and
Mm-hmm.
loving, and she loved her friends. She loved her family, and she was just a pleasure. But she also went through a lot, and the last few years of her life were really, really difficult.
What were her interests? What did
Yeah,
she like to
so
do?
Becca loved gymnastics.
Mm-hmm.
She played guitar. I
Oh,
actually
cool.
still I kept her guitar,
Oh.
and I pick it up every once in a while. She played soccer. Her greatest love was camp, was
Mm-hmm.
summer camp.
Oh,
I have
really
to say
cool.
that was like her second home, and
Oh,
she just thrived
yeah.
at summer camp. And she loved being with her friends. She was a very social person and really had deep, strong relationships with her friends. Gosh, for the last few years of her, it's so weird to say, the last few years of her life,
Mm-hmm.
she worked.
Mm-hmm.
She was working at an ice cream place for a while, which is what I did when I was her age.
I did that
And
too when I was 15. You got to be careful how much ice
yes,
cream you
yes,
eat.
you do. You do. She loved, when she was younger, she loved to read. She
Mm.
was the kid who, she'd go to sleep, turn out the lights, and later we'd see the flashlight underneath the door. We could see her. We knew she was up reading Harry Potter,
We're
huge Harry.
having, I have forced my children to be Harry Potter fans, and we're going to have next weekend, a birthday party for my son, and it's Harry Potter themed.
No, we one of Becca's birthdays was Harry Potter themed as
Oh,
well, and
cool.
she had the cape and
Yeah.
tie, and we had the sorting hat.
Hmm. Yeah. So
Yeah,
fun. We're
so
going to do a pool Quidditch match. So we're working out the rules on
awesome.
how to do it in the pool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Becca, yeah, she loved to read,
Mm.
and that's one of the things that was such a dramatic change once she got her phone and
Mm.
computers came into the scene. Both of my daughters, I have an older daughter, 2 years older, Samantha,
Hmm.
and they were both big readers. And
Hmm.
as soon as they had computers, which they had to have for school, or they had phones, they stopped reading. It was one of the saddest things. Well, I shouldn't say one of the saddest things. There were
Hmm.
so many worse things that ended up happening,
Hmm.
but um, but we were heartbroken that something they loved to do so much
Yeah.
was sort of their brains changed.
Yeah.
It
Oh,
was
yeah.
it becomes too slow, too
Yeah.
boring.
Oh, yeah. Books are boring
Um,
compared to your phone.
yeah,
So, what changed after that? What happened to Becca after she got her phone? And there was a really really hard moment there for her.
yeah. So she got her phone when she was 13, and got into that phase where friends would be over and they'd all be sitting there on their phones instead of doing
Hmm.
something. And
Hmm.
it was something that I did not like at all. And my husband and I both, we weren't people who encouraged this. We were
Hmm.
really people who were trying to discourage the use. But all the other kids, that's how they were socializing.
Yeah.
So when Becca was 15, she was on the cheerleading team. I
Hmm.
forgot to mention, she also loved
Mm.
cheerleading,
Hmm.
gymnastics, cheerleading. Um, She was on the cheerleading team, and her friends from the team had a party chat
Okay.
together. So they
Okay.
all had this party chat, and
Just like a text message group, or is
yes,
okay.
exactly.
Okay.
One of the girls met some boys at a mall
Mhm.
in a different town and ended up inviting them into the party chat.
Mm.
So these were 18-year-old boys,
Mm.
and the girls were 15. And I think they were really excited that 18-year-old boys were paying them attention.
Yeah.
And, they're at that age, they're very vulnerable with these things. After about 2 weeks of conversing over in the party chat,
Mhm.
the boys invited the girls to get together, and the
Mhm.
girls said yes. So they slept over one of the girls' houses that Saturday night. And when the father went to sleep, they snuck out.
Mhm.
And
I've done the
they went,
same thing
yeah, oh, I
when
did
I
too.
was 15. Yeah.
Oh, yep, yep, I did
Normal.
too. The difference was, I think, it just in my case, which was a long time before yours,
Yeah.
was that when you snuck out, you were sneaking out to be with people who were from your school, who knew
Mhm.
you, who
Mm.
you knew, right? And
Yeah.
and there's a certain amount of safety, at least usually, not always, but safety in that. These girls were sneaking out to meet boys who they just didn't have the same, they believe everyone is, you get to know them in 2 weeks of
Chatting.
texting, chatting
Yeah.
back and forth,
Mhm.
and they trusted these boys. And so they took a ride service. I was never able to find out which one, but this ride service took a group of 15-year-old girls without parental permission to another town and
Mm.
dropped them off. And the boys served the girls alcohol right away, and my daughter's drink was very likely drugged.
Mm.
We don't have definitive proof of that, but based on what Becca said and what her friends had told us, that she could not walk.
Wow.
They all had drinks, but she could not walk and couldn't go anywhere. So when the other girls, and I mean the rest of the group, decided to go out, Becca couldn't go with them. And one of the boys, happens to be the boy who had been flirting with her over the chat,
Mhm.
stayed behind with her and raped her.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah, so
Did you find out right away? Did she come home and tell you?
we found out a couple of weeks later,
Mm.
when her sister told her that she needs to tell us,
Mhm.
or she would tell,
Mhm. Mhm.
so Becca then came to us and told us. She, the experience was devastating in itself. She really struggled to cope. We got her therapy, but the last thing she wanted to do at that time was talk about her trauma, and we didn't understand that.
Yeah.
We had no experience with this, and now I understand it, and it makes sense. Why would you want to talk to a stranger about the worst
Mhm.
thing that ever happened to you?
Mhm.
Just a few weeks ago, but
Yeah.
she started drinking a bit, and doing things that she hadn't done before.
Mhm.
So she was spiraling, and some of the kids in school cyberbullied her in this really humiliating way
Mhm.
that just was devastating to her. And after that, she spiraling even more. And I
Mhm.
mean, it was like two traumas within the span of 2 months at the age of 15. And eventually, she turned to drugs, because she could go on her phone and easily find a drug dealer, and she could get relief. Or as
Mhm.
she would say, she had this emptiness in her chest after the traumas. She was trying to fill this emptiness.
Mhm.
And there was this option always available to her that was better than going to a therapist, for her, better than going to a therapist and talking about what she didn't want to talk about. She
Mhm.
wanted to forget about it. And she was able to do that by, picking up something online,
Mhm.
anytime, anywhere.
Mhm. Were you
And
aware at that time she was getting pills or drugs from social media?
no, we
Okay.
did not know.
Okay.
We knew she was doing some drugs, not at 15, but I think we realized at around 17
Okay.
that it had gotten to that point. We knew she had done marijuana before that.
Mm-hmm.
By the time she was 17, we realized that she was starting to do other things. And it was getting worse and worse. And
Mm-hmm.
we were trying to get her help. But nothing helped her in the way that she felt these drugs did. They took her
Mm-hmm.
away from her pain.
Mm-hmm. Did it ever cross your mind, or did you ever think about taking her phone away? But you really didn't put together that it was the phone
We
that
hadn't at
got her
that
access.
point, right?
Okay.
We hadn't at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah.
And then when she did die, I look back at it and say, what if we had done that?
Mm-hmm.
When she did finally, she picked up some drugs that were laced with fentanyl. We don't
Mm-hmm.
believe she was intending to get fentanyl.
Right.
I'm sure of that. And so she picked up some cocaine, and it was laced with fentanyl, and she died. And that's when we discovered that she was often using her phone. Not all the time. I mean, we knew
Mm-hmm.
that she had friends who were giving her some pills here and there and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you're walking a line of trying to not alienate them
Right.
while trying to keep them safe. And
Mm-hmm.
at that time, I didn't know about fentanyl.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she knew about fentanyl. And this was 2020. I mean, we should have known.
Pausing here to talk to you about a tool that could save your child's life. That is the Bark phone and the Bark app. Bark uses advanced AI to scan text, social media, images, videos, and even audio for threats like dangerous challenges, drug content, cyberbullying, even child sexual abuse material, and grooming. The harms of social media are scary, but tools like Bark can give you peace of mind and protect your child. The Bark phone is the most customizable kids phone with text and social media monitoring built into it. It's the safest option for your child. If you're going with an Android or an iPhone, please consider layering on the Bark app, which is a high-tech parental monitoring tool that scans their activities for harmful content, allows you to block certain websites and apps, create screen time schedules, and a ton more. Back to my conversation with Deb Schmill.
So, yeah, so afterwards, when we found out that she could use her phone to find things, find drugs anywhere she was,
Mm-hmm.
um, I thought about that. What if I had taken her phone away?
Mm-hmm.
She was 18 years old at that point. So it's
Yeah.
not that easy. And,
No.
and it was COVID. Their devices were their connection to the world at that
Mm-hmm.
point.
Mm-hmm.
So none of these are easy. There were no easy answers.
No.
What we tried to do was support her as best we can and make sure that she had access to therapy, to any
Mm-hmm.
other resources that we
Mm-hmm.
could find for her.
Yeah.
It ended up not being enough. And I think in the age of fentanyl, I mean, she just didn't have a chance
Mm-hmm.
to work it out.
And I keep hearing from moms that do take the phone away from their kids who may be sort of dependent on the phone, and it causes a huge crisis. In the case of Jenny DeSario, who lost her son Mason immediately
Yes.
after she had taken his phone away, and he couldn't
I
handle it.
was thinking about the same scenario.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's how addicted they are to it. And there just are no easy answers to this,
Yeah.
other than allowing them time without phones,
Mm.
significant time, so
Mm-hmm.
that they're not addicted to them.
Yeah.
And changing the way social media works,
Mm-hmm.
having protections in there so that there aren't addictive algorithms and features that
Mm-hmm.
are keeping our kids glued to their phones and their other devices.
Mm-hmm.
Needs to change.
And Snapchat, for example, says they have a zero tolerance policy for drugs on their platform. Why are so many kids getting access to drugs completely visibly on
Right.
Snapchat?
They are lying. I mean, that may be their policy, but yes, clearly Snapchat is where most kids are getting it because messages disappear. It's the perfect place to do transactions, or at least start the transactions. I know for sure that they're not doing anything about it because my family started a foundation in Becca's memory, and one of the things that we do is we fund research.
Mm,
We hired some researchers
hmm
to investigate what happens when you find these accounts online and report them, and do they get taken down?
Okay.
So the researchers created fake accounts, looked up and tried to find. I mean, they easily found drug dealers on Instagram and Snapchat.
Mm-hmm.
Then they reported these accounts, and more than 90% of the time, they either got no response at all to the reports that drug dealers were openly selling drugs on their platforms,
Mm-hmm.
or they got a message back that said this doesn't go against our community guidelines,
Okay.
which, as you're saying, they say it does. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
They say
So
they're being proactive in
yeah,
removing drug content, but they're not even being reactive in
no,
90% of cases in your example
they're not
when you're
responding.
reporting it.
Yeah. And that's something that would change with KOSA, because they
Yeah.
would be required by law to respond appropriately to reports.
Hmm. So Becca, when she passed away, she was using cocaine at the time, laced with fentanyl. You said
Yeah.
so. That was loose cocaine, like powder.
Yeah.
Okay, because in every case that I've heard so far, every mom or dad I've talked to, it was a pill that the kid was told was an oxy or Percocet that was actually made with fentanyl. So this was powder cocaine that was mostly fentanyl. Was there any cocaine in it? Did you have any information
I
given
don't,
to you?
I actually don't know
Okay.
those specifics.
Mm,
There's sort of two groups here, and I think usually when you hear about young people dying from this, teens,
hmm.
younger,
Yeah.
it's usually a situation where they weren't trying to get some kind of hard drug. They didn't necessarily have a drug problem,
Hmm.
and they just figured they were getting a Xanax or something that they thought was perfectly safe.
Yeah.
In the case of Becca, she had a drug problem,
Hmm.
and there's that whole faction that's usually older
Hmm.
folks, from what I've seen, who have a drug problem and pick up something a little stronger and don't
Hmm.
realize. Yeah. So
Yeah.
nowadays heroin is totally, it is, you can't really get heroin. At least that's my understanding. If
Mm.
you're picking up heroin, you're getting fentanyl.
Hmm.
And if you're picking up cocaine, you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah.
And unless you use fentanyl strips to try to figure
Test it.
out if there's fentanyl in there.
Hmm.
But I would just say, in case anyone's watching this, fentanyl strips aren't 100% either, because you can test one section of the cocaine and it may be that it's not in there, but it's, enough is in another section of the cocaine to
Right.
kill you. So
Right. Oh, Deb, okay. What have you learned through this process that you think is most important for parents to know?
I think keeping the line of communications open with your children is the most important thing. I guess the biggest thing I've learned is there are a lot of things out there you can't protect your children from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things happen. They
Hmm.
happen to everybody. I mean, it's life, but right now there are certain things that are particularly dangerous. And most of us think those things are outside.
Mm-hmm.
But really, you need to be aware of what's going on inside the house with their devices,
Hmm.
because that's where they're getting exposed to, drugs, being able to pick up drugs.
Hmm.
They can go on, they can order drugs and have them delivered to their door.
Hmm.
Um,
Every parent should know that.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And with a few clicks, they can do that.
Hmm.
That's really important, and keeping the lines of communication open, having discussions with your children about these harms that they're exposed to online. I mean,
Hmm.
extortion is so big right now.
Yeah.
Kids need to be aware that there are predators out there online who are going to try to trick them,
Hmm.
and it's devastating. There are just so many things online that we should be talking to our kids about.
And I think it has to go past like, how are you feeling about using Snapchat? Like, how does Snapchat, it can't be that light. It has to be, have
Yeah,
you ever been contacted by a plug on Snapchat? Or has anyone ever asked you for a nude image? Like, we
right.
have to educate ourselves enough to know that
Right.
millions of these kids are getting contacted by predators and drug dealers on social media. We need to just assume that they're going to be contacted by one of these predators, and how are they going to handle it? I mean,
They need to be able to trust their parents and know that they can go to them. And one of the reasons they often don't go to their parents
mm-hmm,
in these cases is because they are afraid their phones will be taken away.
mm-hmm, right.
So trying to have that kind of relationship where they know they can come to you and you'll work with them to figure it out and not immediately take their phone away. Or I
Mm-hmm,
mean, it's just unfortunate that that's the reality of the situation. They
mm-hmm,
need to know they can come to you and trust that
mm-hmm.
you'll work with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those open conversations, the trusting, knowing that they can come to you and you won't take their phone away or punish them if they've gotten themselves into a bad situation, because kids can
Right.
make mistakes these days, and it's pretty heavy what they can get into now through their
Right.
phones. I
Exactly.
really like your point too about making sure we're protecting them in the digital world, not just in the physical world. I think a lot of parents, they give kids devices to protect them in the physical world, but really through those devices, we're giving them access to the whole world and the whole world access to them. And that can be very dangerous. So, say you give your kid an iPad at 6, 5, 6, 7 years old, like a lot of parents do, and that iPad has all the social media apps. And if you're not watching that, your
Yeah.
7-year-old could be contacting an adult predator on their iPads that you think they're just playing games.
Yeah.
So there's also that. We're giving kids devices very young that can access all
Yes.
these things. You forget that kids who you think are just going to play an educational game can actually get over to YouTube, and then some person could comment on something, be like, come over to my WhatsApp group. And then they jump over here, and then now they're in a predator's group chat or something.
Right.
So
Right. And
it's,
that was my kids are old and well, my kids were didn't get their phones till they were like 13, so it
mm-hmm,
wasn't
mm-hmm.
really something that
Yeah,
we
you thought
that
about.
I thought about.
Well, and at schools, they're giving even kindergartners iPads. And what do you feel about that? Because I
Couldn't
hate it.
tell by my reaction.
Yeah.
It is beyond me for so many reasons. For so many
Yeah.
reasons, not just the dangers that are out there. It's their brains. It's brain development. Why do we want to mess with that?
I don't know.
It seems just so wrong to me.
hmm
And kids need to be able to look into each other's eyes. They need
hmm
to be communicating.
hmm
There's so much research on this.
hmm
To put them on iPads in kindergarten, I don't understand it.
hmm
And honestly, if I were in charge of the world,
Yeah.
kids would not have phones in schools,
Yes. Yeah.
and they probably wouldn't have computers till high school.
hmm
My feeling,
Yeah.
just because they need to learn to think.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I think about a lot and thought about back before everything happened with Becca is how kids need to learn to be bored.
Mm-hmm.
They need to learn those coping skills. So, oh, I
hmm
have nothing to do. What do I do with myself?
Yeah.
And that's how you expand your imagination. That's how you take the time to figure out problems. If
hmm
everything is just about flashing things on a screen,
hmm
you don't learn those skills.
Right. Right.
And that's huge. That's
Yeah.
a real problem for the next generation.
Yeah. Think about how that plays out into
Yeah,
adulthood. If you
yeah,
can't focus and their attention, they lose their attention spans.
yeah,
I interviewed a pediatrician recently and a researcher, Dr. John Hutton. That interview is available, but he said boredom is the fertilizer for creativity. And I loved
absolutely.
that quote.
That is,
And
yeah, I love that too. That
yeah,
that says it all. We're not letting our kids be bored anymore,
yeah.
and that's a problem.
It's a big problem when their brains are developing. I mean, let alone adults, that we can't sit in an uncomfortable moment or be bored either. But with their developing brains, like those are building blocks upon each other. And once they miss that phase, it's done. Like they can't get
Right.
that back. So it's just so vital
Yeah.
that when they're little, we let them explore the world and all the dimensions of it, and not just like the eyes on the screen, the audio visual only. You're ignoring all those other senses. And
Absolutely.
so, yeah, I don't know. I encourage this. We got off on a tangent, but I encourage parents to ask their schools if their little ones really need to be using the iPad in class and get together with other parents, because we're having to look at other schools because our school is not open to
Mm.
my what will be 4-year-old going into TK. I don't want her to have an iPad, and they are not open to that. So
I'm with you.
I know.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree and say also to all parents, yeah, if this is something we should all be getting behind.
Yeah.
And it is so, so important. And we need parents to be on board, because the reason the schools are not on board, is too many parents are saying to them they want their kids to know how to use these things, or they want to be able to reach their kids at school,
Mm-hmm.
in case there's a shooting.
Yeah.
Well, we know from research and from the experts that the last thing you want your kids to have in a shooting is a phone. You
Mm-hmm.
want them to be focused on what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And if everyone's on their phones, it blocks the emergency services from being able to reach each other and do what they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, as parents, we need to come together and say, enough is enough. We don't want this anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not good for the kids.
It's not good. They're becoming addicted in kindergarten when we're giving them these devices. But then let alone now they have a second device at school when they're given a phone. We can't. We have to have phone-free schools, and not just away in their backpack, because then they grab it and the teacher has to try to enforce it, and teachers are over it. So they're like, whatever, if you want to be on your phone, you're not learning, that's going to reflect in your grades. But it's so much more harmful than that. So
Yeah. And it's not fair to put the teachers in that position.
no.
But parents
Okay.
really need to speak up so that they can push their school districts
Mm-hmm.
to do this.
Yeah, and it starts with educating. So listening to conversations like this, but then going online and looking up phone-free schools. Look at the schools that have done this and the improvements they've seen across the
Yes.
board in so many different areas. And then share it with a couple parents and go to your principal and say, "Look, why aren't we doing this?"
Yeah.
And especially in elementary and middle school. I know high school is a hard one, but up until 13 years old, they don't need phones in their hands at school. If a parent needs to get a hold of them, it can be after class time.
Or the parent can call the office the way we
Right.
used to do it,
You
and
can
they can
always, they have a phone in,
if there's an emergency.
yeah, there's a phone in every classroom if you really need to get your child. Okay, well, that's a whole other topic, but
Yeah, we
um,
could talk for hours, I'm sure.
yeah. So, Deb, thank you so much for all the work you do to educate parents and support other children. Can you tell me specifically? You talked a little bit about the Becca Schmill Foundation that your family started and that you help fund research, but is there anything else you guys work on? And then where can listeners
Yeah.
find out about your work?
Sure. So we try to meet our mission in three ways. And that mission really is essentially to not let what happened to Becca happen to other children. So we sort of focus on sexual assault, social media harms, and youth substance use.
Mm-hmm.
But the three ways we do that is we fund research. We also fund and host community programming to educate the community about these issues.
Mm-hmm.
And the third thing is we advocate for policies that we believe will protect children.
Right.
And right now, my primary focus is advocating for the Kids Online Safety Act
Mm-hmm.
in Washington, D.C. I do lots of trips to D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And we need more parents to join in that fight. They need to hear from you, from parents.
Yep.
Senators and representatives need to hear from their constituents that this matters to them.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a good bill out there that'll protect so many children.
Yes. And so parents can go to house.gov or senate.gov and find the representatives and then just say, hey, can you support the Kids Online Safety Act? Or, hey, can you just protect kids online? Like anything general. Tell them a story about how your child was, introduced to something harmful online. They do. I mean, I hear over and over again that our elected officials, they want to hear from us. And they need to
They
hear from us in order to represent us, right? They need to know how we feel about these things. So I
I've been
highly,
told they take account of
yeah,
like how many emails, how many calls they get
yep,
like every day on a topic.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it does matter.
If you have the time, contact them every day until we can get KOSA passed, because it's been sitting too long, and it will help protect our kids. And so listeners can go to, is it BeccaSchmillFDN.org, right?
Yes.
Okay, and that's
Yes.
BECCA.
BECCA.
I'll put the
Oh,
link in the episode notes. Deb, thank you so much for having this conversation with me, for educating parents, for everything you do. I know it's so hard to relive this story over and over. You do it to protect other children, and you are. And so thank you so much for everything you do, Deb.
thank you for everything you do too, and to spread the word. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for having me.
Of course.